Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or a passionate member of your faith community, this podcast is designed to challenge, inspire, and equip you with the tools you need for impactful ministry. And now for a little bit about the guest for this episode.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today is our 200th episode. Congratulations to Loren on this podcasting milestone and the vision and faithful work it has taken to get here. In this celebratory episode, Loren Richmond Jr. is facilitating a roundtable discussion on clergy wellness with Brian Davis, Kinsie Tate, and me, Martha Tatarnic. Brian has been leading worship in the Denver metro area for the last 25 years and has built relationships with dozens of churches all over the city. Authenticity and empathy have been hallmarks of Brian's leadership, and his intention is to use these attributes to coach other worship leaders and inspire greater creativity and deeper spiritual practice in the local church. Brian has 3 daughters, and he and his wife, Jess, live in Lakewood, Colorado. He also serves part-time as the worship arts director at New Denver Church. Kinsie is the founder and executive director of Restore Clergy, an organization that exists to build resiliency in clergy so that they may have faithful and sustainable ministries. She is a licensed professional clinical counselor with over 15 years' experience. She was ordained in 2007 and maintains endorsement with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the Pacific Southwest region. She maintains a private therapy practice in Newport Beach, California, where she lives with her spouse, Chris, a United Methodist minister serving a local congregation, their 3 school-aged children, and their therapy dog, Daisy. I, Martha, am occasional host on this podcast. I'm a published author and an Anglican priest in a bustling urban church, St. George's, in the Niagara region of Ontario. A reminder before we start today's special conversation, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share Future Christian with a friend. Connect with us on Instagram or other social media platforms. Shoot us an email at lauren@resonatemediapro.com with comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes. We appreciate your voice in how we faithfully discern the future of the church.
All right, welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. I am Loren Richmond Jr., and today I'm excited to be joined by my co-host, Martha Tatarnic. Hello.
Hi, great to be here for the roundtable.
Yeah, we have a special roundtable episode. We're welcoming with us today Kinsie Tate. Kinsie?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
And then Brian Davis. Hello, Brian.
Hello, Loren. Hello, Kinsie and Martha.
So
Glad to be here.
This is hopefully be a good, fun, but also very engaging and profitable conversation around pastoral health. Kinsie and Brian both work with pastors and church leaders in various contexts. And of course, Martha will also be, is a leader and works with pastors in her own right. So she'll be joining the roundtable as part of the panelists here too. So let's do this. Let's take just a moment to introduce yourselves for our listeners, beginning with Martha, kind of who you are, what context you work in, and then follow up with the question, what pastoral health means to you in your role.
Okay, well, regular listeners of Future Christian will know me as a sometime host of Future Christian, and it's fun to be able to do an episode together with Loren today. I'm also in full-time ministry leading an Anglican congregation in a very town urban setting. And I've been ordained in the Anglican Church for 20 years. So I've got quite a repertoire of experience in church ministry. I also wear a hat as a writer. So I'm sort of often considering these questions of clergy health and church health, congregational health from a variety of lenses. And I think it's fair to say that this is a topic that just keeps coming up as a thread in our conversations on Future Christian. So if I were going to define pastoral health, I think what I would land on is just to say that there needs to be a sense for people in ministry that they're doing what they're called to do. Now, there's a lot of aspects to leading a congregation. There's a lot of different hats that you wear, a lot of different components of the role. In some ways, that can be what makes the job exciting and life-giving, is that you don't do the same thing every day. And that there is like a lot of grunt work that you need to do in ministry. But at the end of the day, I feel like I'm healthy in ministry if I can see a relationship between most of the components of how I'm spending the day and what I feel I'm called to as a Christian, and particularly a Christian in leadership. And to me, that really boils down to, like, am I building community, and am I part of how people are attending to the presence of God? You know, like, those are kind of the two pieces that I think Jesus really clearly calls us to. And so I want to be healthy. I want to feel like most of what I'm doing is connecting to that job description.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Martha. Kinsie, introduce yourself and answer the same question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kinsie Tate. I am an ordained Disciples of Christ clergy, but I have been practicing as a licensed professional clinical counselor for, I don't know, like 15 years, something like that, long time. And so that is kind of the main focus that I come at this question from. And I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit called Restore Clergy, whose mission is to build resilience in clergy so they can have faithful and sustainable ministries. And so I think about pastoral health as, how do we make it sustainable? I think there's a lot of burnout, and there's a lot of research that shows that people burn out a lot of times within their first 5 years.
Yeah.
And then they're finding other vocations. And so what I'm really curious about is, why is that happening? And I think there's some good research around that. And so that's why I developed a program to try to help clergy understand what's going on in me that's maybe making this harder.
Yeah.
And so I think about pastoral health really from a personal perspective. And I do recognize that it is not just an individual problem. It is definitely a systemic issue. But my specific focus is on, how can I help the individuals, build community? Because I think there's a lot of loneliness and isolation in being clergy. But also to really understand, what am I bringing into the situation that may be making it harder than it needs to be? So that's kind of my focus. I don't have the clout or the, status, or I don't know, I'm not in those circles where we're talking about the systemic issue of the church. And so the focus that I bring is really helping individuals focus on their own personal health and how that is impacting their role as clergy.
Yeah. Thank you. Brian, go answer the same.
Yeah. So I'm Brian Davis. I lead a nonprofit organization called Green Room Leaders, and our primary goal is to help worship leaders specifically get off the ministry treadmill of running from Sunday to Sunday. And so also care very deeply about their health. I'm also part-time worship arts director at a small church, kind of southeast of downtown Denver. And so get to try to practice what I preach, I guess.
Right.
So I guess for me, as I love all of your answers, and totally wholeheartedly agree. For me personally, pastoral health is when your identity is firmly rooted in who you are in Christ, as opposed to what you do. I feel like that has become just so just insidious in every part of our culture, but seeing it happen in ministry as well. And I've seen it happen in my life as well, where we just don't know who we are if we're not fulfilling our ministry role. Like, if I'm not up on stage leading worship, who am I? And that was a question that I wrestled with many years ago when I was given some medical leave for a stroke that I had. And it freaked me out. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself if I'm not standing on stage every Sunday singing songs for people, and so that has been my focus, especially the last 5-6 years, is helping worship leaders realize, like, it starts way before you step on a stage. It starts with understanding who Christ sees you as in here. So there you go.
Brian, thank you for sharing that. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I mean, I know all you people. I've obviously, Martha, we're hopefully going to do this summer. Like, this is my goal. Martha and I'm going to travel to Martha's neck of the woods. And my wife is allowing it as an international trip.
So kind of her.
I know. She's like, okay, I'll come along. We can do that. So that's our goal. And Martha and I will get a chance to connect in person. But
3D over some food and
But Kinsie and I obviously have had a chance to connect in person. And Brian, we've had Brian's been on the pod. I'll have to link this. Kinsie and Brian have been on the pod, so I'll link their individual episodes too. So I want to do this sort of where I continue to ask you all some individual questions, and then we'll move to some group questions. But really what kind of got me on this was Kinsie and I did our interview last January, I think it was. And then once we stopped recording, I kind of just hit Kinsie with these questions like, why do pastors do this? And just gave her some silly questions. So I sort of want to continue that down that vein. And Kinsie, you can choose to kind of respond how you want to. Brian, I have some doozies for you too. But Kinsie, first, like, I think I said this to you then, but I'm going to repeat this question. Like, whenever I feel like I go hang out with mainline pastors, and we'll bang on the evangelical leaders here in a second, but whenever I hang out with mainline pastors, it seems like mainline pastors are always like, when we're getting in an Uber or something, we'll always be like, oh, we're pastors, but we're cool because we cuss and we drink and whatever. And I'm just like, what is that about? Like, what is that about, Kinsie?
So I really think it's about getting away from that perfect pastor rigidity that can feel really stifling, of like, you show up on Sunday and you're expected to be this model of Christianity and this perfect, like, Christ-like figure. And even though rationally we know that that's not real and people react to us more when we are vulnerable and like show all of our faults, I think there's still this carryover of what it is to be clergy. I mean, we've got ethical standards and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's when clergy get together, it's almost like, let's just completely blow out all that out of the water and just, like, I don't know, almost go to the exact opposite, just to prove that we're not, like, I don't know, square or whatever. I can't think of a more like up-to-date word, like from the 1950s. But that's, I think, where that like persona comes from, of like, like you have to be this good church pastor. And when you don't have your church pastor hat on, it's almost like, let me show everyone how cool I am by like boozing it up and cussing. It's like, is that really who you want to be? Or does it feel like you have to swing the pendulum all the way to the other side, to just show that you're not whatever this persona is.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think most clergy, after they have a event like that, they don't really feel good about it. It's almost like the shadow side of ourselves that we let out of the box every once in a while. It's like, well, let's put that back in real quick, and hide it away. So yeah, I think a lot of times people don't feel good after doing that. Usually physically you really don't feel good.
Right.
And so there's just this whole thing that goes along with it.
Yeah. Right. The irony is like those kind of clergy get-togethers are meant to be like refilling. And so often like folks come away like exhausted more. And I've just learned, like, I gotta say, like, hey, 8:00, 8:30, whatever. Like, that's my bedtime. It's not really, but I need some time to shut it down. Brian, you can respond to that same question if you want to, but I also kind of want to ask you, like, this is again stereotypical, but I feel like what I've seen, and I don't know if this is a trend that's still a thing, but the whole like smoking hot wife thing, where it's like pastors got to get up and be like, oh, I got this smoking hot wife. And what is this kind of like similarly performative thing about whether it's being like, oh, I'm so like my wife and I have a perfect relationship, or like, I'm super on fire for God. And I'm certainly caricaturing evangelicalism, but do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it comes from, I hope it comes from kind of a good place of like, hey, I'm saying this because I love my wife, and I, I believe in her, and I, in some evangelical circles, it's like, yeah, I believe in her, but I'm not going to let her, actually do anything important. But it comes across as super kind of creepy and almost kind of gross. Like, I don't want to hear you talk about your wife like that from the stage. Like, I don't want to hear you talk about your wife like that anywhere. But yeah, I don't know. I think it is that urge to try to come across as like relatable to the everyday person, like, see, look at me. I, just because I'm on this stage and I'm wearing a, $500 watch and I, $600 tennis shoes, I'm still just like you. Like, look at my wife. She's smoking hot. Aren't I cool? Cause I called her smoking hot, And so I think there is this urge and this desire to be really relatable and really, I'm just like you. I talk just like you. Sometimes I drink just like you. I see how similar we are. But often the reality is like so far from that. Like you're almost putting on this show. And so maybe they do that in public to show like, I'm not putting on this show. I actually am this way. Sometimes that can be a clue that maybe things actually behind the scenes are way, way worse,
Right. Right.
Like that's sort of just this little bit that you let out is actually a clue to something deeper and way more awful. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's just this desire to, again, sort of strip away that, sort of pull away that curtain of like, no, I'm no different than you are. But I think there's still this reality that, yeah, you are still pretty different than, than most people you come across on the street.
Yeah. Kinsie?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that, and also what you were asking me about. I think some of that too is how lonely clergy are, because it's this whole thing of like you are set apart and you are put up. Brian, you called it a stage, like it's like you're up there and you're performing. And I think, Loren, to your point about clergy gatherings, is it's really hard to turn off that switch of like, I still have to perform. And so maybe there is liquid courage, like if we're drinking, it can kind of settle the nerves. But I think that's where problems come into play, because if that's the only way that I can relax, then, obviously that can set you down a path of addiction and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I heard the whole thing of clergy usually give sermons on things that they need to hear themselves.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if, that's the same in the evangelical tradition of, what they're talking about from the pulpit might give you a hint into maybe some of the things they're struggling with or the things they're trying to mask and hide from the congregation or maybe even from themselves.
Yeah, I totally, it's funny that you bring that up. I was just talking about this the other day. When getting our way back machine, when everything happened at New Life with Ted Haggard, my older brother was actually attending. He sang in the choir, like very involved at New Life. And my family had some connection there too. We would attend every once in a while. But when all that happens, and go even further back, like Ted Haggard was very, anti-LGBTQ, like, and made no bones about it. Like he would preach that from the platform, like, and, my dad said, like, I'm when all of the defecation hit the rotary oscillator, my dad was like, yeah, I'm not surprised at all. Because often, like, what people rail against the most from the platform when they're preaching is usually the thing that they struggle with the most. And I was like, oh, Dad, you're real smart. And then he cried because that was the first time I ever said that to him. And it was, it was a really touching father-son moment. But yeah, I think that's absolutely true, that a lot of those things that we try to espouse from the stage, or the things that we teach and preach, are often the things, that I need to work on the most in myself.
So let's let Martha jump in here. And Martha, feel free to respond to what's happened so far. But I also want to ask you from the perspective of where this kind of performative nature, I think, happens a lot, is like the clergy group, like the clergy lunch. Like I'm thinking like the behind the scenes, that statement that Brian made. I think it was Brian. So respond to any of this. I'm thinking again of like the clergy group where there's one, where I've seen it, where there's like one clergy who either feels the need to be super like, oh, my ministry's going so great, or almost like the opposite. I think sometimes in mainline circles where like things are so awful. Like what hits you there?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of build on what has been shared so far, like I think everybody is naming a piece in this that we don't want to lose, which is like pedestals haven't served clergy well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody has been served well by being put on a pedestal, either the person themselves or congregations. It's not a healthy dynamic. So that need to really position ourselves as fellow disciples who are also on the journey, not perfect. And at the end of the day, we are just people. I think that is extremely important. I mean, yeah, you get the bitch and brag dynamic in clergy gatherings that can be not the funnest thing about clergy gatherings. And I think that, kind of at the end of the day, it is really hard to get outside of the success failure, like polemic that we're set up with in ministry, because, at the end of the day, like there is very much a sense of competition across our churches. I don't think that we call that out enough. I don't think that we are honest enough about it. The more that Christianity and participation in organized religion declines, the more that there is a sense that we're all competing for scarcer resources. Yeah. And so it is, I think, hard, even when we're trying to be fellow disciples, and even when we're trying to get off that pedestal, I think it can be hard to step outside of that need, like to prove that we're successful, or to get outside of that guilt that we feel when we're not successful. Like we just get so set up to feel like if things aren't going well, it's my fault.
Yeah. Martha, let's stay on this, because I'm sensing some from Brian, like something's bubbling up within me. Like I just wrote a Substack about like processing my own kind of grief and like be real, like somewhat guilt from my own church planning efforts, like that ended 3 years ago. So, Brian, it seems like you got something bubbling up here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm wearing my glasses, so you probably can't see it. Like I'm tearing up a little bit, because that is like, gosh, that success failure competition piece is so, it's so, I feel like it's so destructive and it's so ugly. And it's something that I have struggled with too. Like, I mean, before I served at the church I'm at now, like I served at 2 very large, fast-growing churches in the Denver metro area. And I still will see or hear about, these great successes that they're having and the growth, and their worship team. Well, they're making albums now, and, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm leading worship for 125 people on a Sunday, in a borrowed building, like where did it all go wrong? And here's the funny thing. I'm happier in ministry than I think I've ever been in my 27 years of doing this. But I see that, and there's something in me that goes, you missed it. You missed that train. And I hate that is there, and I need to find some way to try to integrate that for sure. But like, and I try not to, but I look at social media and I see, the people at the big churches, and I see the lights, and I see the hands raised, and I see all of that stuff. And it is hard for me not to think like that. Could that have been me? Like, how different would my life have been? And then all the, like you said, the guilt that comes in with, the stuff that surrounds why I ended up leaving that church and all that. Like, it's just, it is painful to think like that is, and it's even more painful to let it go. I think it bubbled up in me because like I never thought about it that way of like, oh, there is still some guilt and some regret that lives there. As a result of, how things went and where my life has taken me now. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Brian.
Yeah.
Kinsie, what's rising within you as you hear this conversation?
Well, so Loren, you were when I was at PTS, and I talked about like typical stress responses and like compete as a typical stress response. And that's what's coming up for me. And I think we often feel that in our business context, whatever that may be. I mean, I definitely feel it with a nonprofit. I will compare myself to others and feel like I'm behind. And other times I'll feel like, yeah, I'm like winning, but that's not as often, but it's that same kind of comparison. And I don't think that's inherently wrong. Like, I think it's good as human beings to kind of think about, I mean, we can't do it without it. We're social beings. So we constantly kind of compare so that we can make sure that we fit in and we belong. I mean, ultimately it's about belonging, that comparison. But when it goes off course is when we feel like, I don't belong. Like what I'm doing isn't good enough. The people that I'm bringing to Christ, these 125 people, Brian, like maybe they have deeper, more meaningful relationships with Jesus Christ and each other. But, when we're in that stress response, and it can come from like, maybe money's tight. Like I know a lot of churches, money's tight. We've got these old crumbling buildings, and it's like, I'm doing really good ministry with these people, and I feel like I'm failing because we don't have money, or maybe I'm struggling because I can't get a raise.
Yeah.
And then I feel guilty about asking for a raise because like the church is struggling. So there's all these layers, that I think trying to, when you feel that rise up, is like, is this about capitalism and I feel like I'm not producing? Is this about patriarchy and I need to be a certain way to be considered like powerful? Is this about, I'm just tired, and when I'm tired, I feel like I don't do a good job. So it's so complex. And I think that's why these conversations are important. And this is what I would really love for clergy gatherings to be. You know, like we could talk about these things and really have some insight and feel those emotions well up and have a safe space to talk about it. And maybe hear from, you know, like you heard from Martha, it's like, oh, I'd never thought about it that way. Like that's so helpful. Gives me a new level of insight to kind of integrate what it is that I'm feeling. So it doesn't come out sideways, like, from the pulpit, you know, or towards my spouse. So yeah, like I would love it if clergy gatherings could be like this, but I think it takes a level of vulnerability and within yourself to feel safe enough to do that. And a lot of them are, to Martha's point, you're competitive. You walk in with your guard up of like, I got to prove that I'm doing a good job because I feel so worthless and guilty, but I can't let anybody see that.
Yeah. Yeah. Martha, you kind of initiated this conversation. I mean, you've been doing this 20 years of ordained ministry. The Anglican Church in Canada, again, I only know from a distance, but I imagine from what I've heard, it's facing many of the same challenges, if not further along, right, than churches in the States face. The pressure on pastors, the dwindling resources. Share more what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I mean, there was an article that came out maybe a month ago saying that the Anglican Church of Canada is already dead. Wow. So, like there's sort of regular reports on, the declining resources and the declining membership. And, you know, my colleagues will hear Brian's words about 125 people and think like I'd be thrilled to have 125 people
right.
On a Sunday. Like we're definitely talking about different scales here. You know, I think in many of our denominational systems and definitely in the Anglican system, there is a body that should allow these systemic collective conversations to take place. But at the end of the day, it, I think on the ground still feels as if like we're all just competing for a smaller and smaller market share. And then there's tremendous stress and grief, not just for the pastor, but for the congregations as well. And then that can kind of produce a feedback loop that makes, that makes it all the harder to minister in a congregation that is just consumed with grief about seeing something that they've loved and served slipping away from them.
Yeah. And it's like, it's the pastor's fault, clearly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I guess the other dynamic I would just want to name as well is, the hero worship when things do go well isn't any healthier. Like that's like, certainly we can feel a lot of guilt, but it's also really a bad, spiritual place to get into where you start to believe your own press when people say like, oh, well, you know, you've saved us and we can't do this without you. And, so, you know, all of that can just be really soul destroying, right across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take some individual questions here. And I do want to come back, Martha, to the topic of systemic issues. Kinsie, what are your thoughts on signs that a pastor might be aware of that they're approaching burnout or some kind of real mental health challenge?
Yeah, I think if a big sign is if you are dreading going to work, I think that's a pretty clear indication that you're probably hardcore in burnout at that point. If you're just kind of like, I don't really like this aspect of my job, it's just something to check in on. But if you're exhausted all the time, you don't have energy, you're cranky, and you really think of the people in your congregation as bothersome. Like there's a lot more bothersome people than there used to be. I think that is an indication. And also, I recently was talking to a pastor, and he was talking about he was coming back from 3 months of leave. And he said, and he had a tremendous amount of guilt about this, but he said, I just don't want to take care of people. I don't have it in me to hear about their problems and feel like I have to take care of it. And I'm like, yeah, pretty much hardcore burnout.
Yeah.
And the tricky part about that is, what are the options? Like he had been on leave. And so then what do you do at that point? How do you address that? And that's, kind of an individual thing to kind of look at, what are my options? Some of it can be is looking at, are you sure, like, why is it your responsibility to take care of them? Like, is that the only way that this would work? Are there laity that you could share this with, and maybe you could create a pastoral care team, kind of getting creative? But it's hard when you're in burnout to be creative and to feel like there are options. So it's just this kind of, it can be this, spiral down. And so that's why, again, I think it's even more important that you build up a cohort of clergy or good friends, if it doesn't have to be clergy, that you can talk through about this. But I think it's helpful to have other clergy, because then they can help you be creative when you're in a bad spot. And sometimes we just need to be heard and feel like we're seen, and that can help relieve a lot of that. So yeah, I think those are the big things. You can look at if you're super anxious, that's another indication that you might be, on the cusp of burnout, of like, oh my gosh, I've got to get up there and I've got to preach again. And I have nothing. And I don't even know that I believe it anymore. That kind of stuff is, that's rough.
Yeah, that is good. Brian, I want to ask this question to you.
Yeah.
I've heard this said by other leaders who influence clergy, that clergy and other, church leaders can get in the space where we really look at ourselves as employees of God rather than as children of God. Like we're so obsessed with kind of facilitating other spiritual encounters that we sort of lose and disconnect from God ourselves. What are your perspectives on that?
Yeah. That sort of like the way I sort of differentiate that is doing for God versus being with God.
Right.
That's one of the big, distinctions we try to make with green room leaders when we're talking to worship leaders about it, is that there's from the time that we, even going back before we probably even became followers of Jesus, like you're a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, and somebody first asks you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What they're really asking you is, how are you going to contribute to this great society that we've created? What are you going to do to be productive? And then that seeps into our Christianity, because even at least in the evangelical tradition, when I gave my life to Christ and invited Jesus into my heart, there was all this great fanfare, and, like they do this whole big thing at church. And then as soon as it's over, like I was whisked away to the pastor's office, given a Bible, and said, okay, go home and read the book of Mark. That was it. Like, and then figure out, like, okay, now what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to serve? What are you going to do for God? If there had been, like, okay, so you made the decision to follow Jesus. Now you get to go away on a week-long silent retreat and just enjoy being with him. How different would my Christianity look? How much different would all of our Christianity look if there wasn't such a huge emphasis put on, now what are you going to do for God? And I think that, again, is one of those things that just leads to that burnout, but also it leads to that sort of that feeling of indispensability, of like, well, if I'm not going to do it, nobody else will. There was I still hear it every once in a while, but it really started to rise up kind of the early 2000s, where it was like, you'd be in your pre-service meeting or whatever, and someone, usually the lead pastor, would say something like, okay, everybody, like, this may be our one chance to ever speak the truth of the gospel to the people that are sitting in these seats. So don't blow it. Like, I like, how much pressure are you putting on ourselves? Like, that just, pardon my language, but that just reeked of bullshit to me from the beginning. Like, this is not, the fact that someone's personal salvation is entirely up to me and how I perform from the stage. I had to reject that right away, but there are so many who haven't, and still put all that pressure on themselves, to be the one hope for these people who have walked through the doors of our church. There's only one hope, and that's Jesus. And I'm not Jesus. So I'm going to try to start taking the pressure off myself and take all this stuff off of me, and just see what it's like to be with, and see the fruit of that relationship. It's slower. It's not as exciting. It's not as sexy, but man, it's really good fruit. Is what I'm finding, that when I can slow myself down and invite other people to slow down and just be with and do ministry with God instead of for him, the fruit of that is so much better. And it's so much less damaging to my soul and to the souls of the people around me. Yeah, this is great. Martha, what are you hearing here that you want to echo?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, there definitely is a sacrificial element to being a worship leader, right? Like, you can't just get lost in wonder, love, and praise. Like, you do need to be attentive to shepherding your people in a particular way. That, for me anyway, and I've said this many times on the podcast, like, it actually is kind of against my natural grain. Like, I'm not a naturally extroverted person. I don't enjoy speaking I don't enjoy public speaking. I think I'm good at it, but like, it's not how I would choose to spend my time. Yeah. And yet, I think when I'm healthy in ministry, I can experience those sacrificial elements as very spiritually meaningful, because I find, like, my prayer center is just like, God, I need you to do something with this, because, like, I don't have, like, confidence in this just, like, by myself. So yeah, like, I feel like if I can return to that prayer, like, whatever I'm feeling stressed about in the worship today and whatever I'm anxious about in getting up in that pulpit, like, God, if you can please do something with it, like, that can be a very rich place to land, and it can bring a ton of joy in ministry, even when it's not always easy.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears here slightly, just if only because we're already 40 minutes in, and man, we need about 40 more hours, I think. But Martha, I want you to lead off this part of the conversation, but we talk about systemic changes. Now, certainly for our guests here, some of us are in more defined systems than others. Obviously in evangelicalism, there are, Brian, you could speak better to this than I could. There are some more structured networks than others, right? But Martha, why don't you start off talking about, especially from your perspective as a pastor, what you think structurally could be done, whether it's in the local church setting or in a network denominational setting, to help pastors?
Yeah, I think I have like kind of a couple of observations about that, and they are like linked on both a congregational level and a denominational level. I would say, like, by and large, I have enjoyed a happy ministry. You know, it hasn't always been easy, and I have had times of struggle, but by and large, like 2 decades of ministry have been happy. And the major thing that I credit to that is that I have always worked in a team. So
Yeah.
I have never felt like I have to be the jack of all trades. And I've never felt particularly lonely in ministry, which I think is, quite different from a lot of people's experience. So I think that there is something systemically that we could do with that observation. So in my denomination, okay, like we have dwindling congregations and dwindling resources, but we do have resources. Like we do have a lot of real estate. We have a lot of bank accounts. That's not to like diminish the very real financial hardships that a lot of individual congregations and some networks face in the Anglican Church. But it is to say that if you looked across the Anglican Church of Canada, you could like sum up a lot of resources that feel like a complete system of scarcity when everybody's just fighting over those resources in their own individual congregations, right? So what I would love to see is some collective conversations about, okay, like we're all in this because we love our church and we want to serve God. And so collectively, what do we have? Like, what gifts do we have? And then how are we going to direct those gifts to do the work that we believe that we're called to do? I think that's a very different conversation than just an individual pastor in an individual congregation feeling like, why can't I make this work? And how are we going to keep this ship afloat? So, I mean, that's a pretty specific example from my context, but I think that there are those sort of systemic conversations waiting to be held across the Christian landscape, and I think that the more that we can think about how we create teams of ministry, and I don't mean just ordained leaders,
Right.
but, teams of people whose gifts complement one another and who are, deployed, equipped, resourced, to be able to share those gifts to build up the body of Christ in the place where they're called. I think that really could be a game changer.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Martha. I'm just thinking of a conversation I had yesterday with another pastor, and we talked about, like, even just doing something where one pastor's preaching live and the video is being piped into another church. I mean, like, it's not, obviously everyone wants a great dynamic preacher in front of them, but also like Life Church in the States has made a model of that. So it's not like it's completely unfeasible. Brian and Kinsie, let's start with Kinsie. What thoughts do you have on just that kind of the systemic nature? Obviously you come about it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think, and I'm thinking of it from more of a mainline perspective where there tends to be a middle judicatory, like there are people that are in higher levels in denominations, I feel like we have a lot of meetings and there's not a lot of action. And that really could be because we don't do conflict well in the church. Like we can often get stuck on being the church of nice, and we want to hear everyone's perspective and we want to make sure everyone's heard. And it's like, yes. And at some point we've got to move beyond meetings and actually start just trying stuff and really looking at it as this is totally an experiment, and it could be an epic fail, and we realize that, but there could be learning and new insight to come out of that. And I think we're so often stuck in this analysis paralysis mode of like, we need more data, we need more assurance of like, no, like just get out there and do it, like embody it, like get out there and I don't know, try some programs or something. So I don't exactly know what that is about. Maybe it's just human nature, and maybe when you get to a certain level, you have a lot more tendency to be risk averse. But I think we need some courage and some bravery, because otherwise we're just going to die due to attrition, like, because we're not doing anything and we're just stuck. So that's my ideas around like the systemic issues.
Brian, obviously in an evangelical space, there's not as much formalization or necessarily organization. Obviously that somewhat varies, right? Depending on the tradition within evangelicalism. Obviously Southern Baptists have a denomination, Vineyard, Calvary, they have various levels of organization. Feel free to respond to what Martha and Kinsie said, but I'm also curious from your perspective, like, do you think that lack of organization is sometimes a challenge for pastors or leaders? Like, I'll speak from my own experience. Like, there was a time, even though I was working for a denominational church, because the church was so cut off from the denomination, it felt like I was kind of on an island. And when like I was getting hammered by the church for things that were not fair, it was like, I could be like, hey, the denomination says this. And they're like, hey, we don't care.
Yeah. I'm not as familiar with, the like mainline sort of, structures and organizations. So like when I hear like my Methodist friends, say like, yeah, well, I'm not pastoring this church anymore because the synod or whatever, they decided I need to go to this church now. And it's like, oh, they can do that? Like it just seems so foreign to me. So I don't know a ton about that. I do know like there is organizational structure within the evangelical church, even non-denominational, but where I think we've pretty much just adopted it all from big business. And so your lead pastor is CEO, your executive pastor is your, COO or whatever, like we have, you can almost take those organizational structures from big business and superimpose them on top of a lot of, especially larger evangelical churches. Which I think there are plus sides to that because, you do need some good leadership. You do need that organization. But it has also, I think we've also adopted a lot of big business strategies. And so where like, we start asking ourselves questions like, what's the win? And we operate our budgets the way that big businesses operate their budgets. And we make decisions based on a fear of failure, like you were saying, Kinsie, so basically what are we going to do to protect the bottom line? But there's a lot of confusion about what that bottom line is. Is that bottom line like the souls that we're saving? Is that bottom line the music that we're doing? Is that bottom line the amount of money that we're bringing in? Is that bottom line the number of butts that are in the seats? It's so nebulous. And so that has caused, I think that's what is causing a lot of the attrition that you're seeing on evangelical church staffs. They're like, I don't understand the game anymore, so I'm just not going to play it. And so they're self-ejecting because they don't know the rules of the game and they don't know how to play it. As far as like systemic changes that I would love to see within the evangelical church, I think there's a lot that we can learn from models, like the Anglican Church. where, that we probably could use a little bit more accountability from the top down. We probably could use a little bit more structure. But I think we could learn a lot about like congregational care, and from those models. I know there's a group of, I guess, more evangelical-ish churches here in the Denver area, that have adopted more of like a parish model for how they care for their congregations, where it's all centered around neighborhoods. It's not necessarily like, how could we reach the whole city for Christ, or how could we reach our whole state or the whole world? There's like, how could we just reach our neighborhood? And how can we mobilize the people within our congregation to care for their neighborhood and things like that? So, because a lot of the burnout that comes in the evangelical world comes from that pressure to be everything for everyone. And so we have a program for every single person in the church. Like, our ministry for people with size 8 shoes who are 5'5" and have hazel eyes will meet on Thursday nights. Oh, and we've hired a pastor just specifically for those people. It's just ridiculous. And so to be able to put that onus on the congregation to be the priesthood of believers and say, like, you have what you need to care for the people around you. And if you don't have what you need, then we'll step in and we'll help you. But it just, the fact that we have a program and an opportunity for every single person and staff that with a pastor it's just getting out of hand. So I would love to see us learn a little bit more from our high church brothers and sisters about how to care for our congregations and care for our communities without it having to be a staff person all the time.
Yeah. Let's do this. We're approaching an hour here, and I don't want to keep you all too much longer. Let's take a break, and we'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back. So let's do some practical things. So maybe share a resource, whether it's this podcast, right, that folks can listen to.
Definitely, that's one of the resources.
Yes.
Martha, I was hoping you'd at least take up that mantle. Something practical someone can do to support their own mental, or emotional, or spiritual health, and maybe something you've done yourselves to take that first step toward help. So Martha, why don't you begin?
Yeah, I mean, shameless plug is intentional, but as I've been listening to this conversation, like the word that just keeps bubbling up for me is learning. And I think that when we can be people who are in ministry and in the life of faith as students, which is what disciple actually means, as people who are learning, then I do think that is a big way that we dismantle the success failure dichotomy. I think that is a big way that we take the performative anxiety, some air out of the tires on that performative anxiety, is when, like, we have that permission to try some things and then to know that we're going to be able to learn from them together. And I think that really is like why Loren and I do this podcast. Like, I think that we have a variety of reasons why we do it. For me, like, that's the big reason. Like, I want a space where we're hearing from a whole bunch of different perspectives about what is actually happening and what we're learning. So that we can, like, just be people who realize, like, we are in a time of absolutely epic change in terms of religious participation, and we just have to put our student hats on and be willing to hear one another, listen deeply, experiment, and with the Holy Spirit as our partner to figure out some next steps. So that would be kind of the resource piece that I would say. On a just much more personal level, I will say, like, for myself, that my wellness is really attached to being able to be in my body and build some physical exercise into my life. That doesn't sound like a super spiritual thing to say. It is. Like, for me, it really is. Like, that is what I need in order to have time to reflect and pray, to discern, to take that little knot of yarn that's got all tangled up and to feel like I can unknot it. And like, just a trick that I started doing during the pandemic, and I've really tried to stay with it, is that when I have a phone call that I need to make in my work, which is often, I have a lot of phone calls I have to make, checking in with people and that kind of thing, I just try to walk while I'm on the phone. And like, that's just kind of a little hack that I think can build some wellness. If the weather stinks, then I walk around the sanctuary while I'm talking on the phone. So yeah, those are just a couple
that's good. Kinsie, share maybe something from, something you'd recommend to leaders, to pastors, and then we're going to give you time to plug your stuff. So I guess, Martha, we cheated, didn't we?
We cheated. Yeah.
We cheated.
Shamelessly.
Hey,
shamelessly
cheated.
What?
It's
this
your
is our
podcast.
Show. We can cheat. We can cheat.
Yeah, do what you want.
Kinsie, share something pastors can do, and then another resource you'd recommend for them.
Yeah, I really think that community is important. I know that, like, our church is our community, but really finding a place where you feel like you can connect. And if you're not finding it for free, really consider investing in it. Like, pay for something that feels like it's worth your time. Because, the biggest indicator of what we truly value is how we spend our time and our money. Yep. And so if you really value that, then maybe it's worth finding something, or, asking your middle judicatories, or finding maybe even your church, like, hey, can you help me pay for this? So I think finding a good group, a cohort, even if you have to pay for it to start out with, is worth the time and investment. And as far as like a takeaway, I agree with Martha, like, the physical movement. I think we underestimate that. Because of diet culture, we really have put it in this like weight loss category, but it's not. It is so important for our just physical, mental, even spiritual well-being. I mean, if you think about like how we get tied up in knots, and how, like, my best friend can always tell us, like, you're pacing, aren't you? And I'm like, I am, because I'm like talking to her and I'm pacing around the room, and it's just like helps me move through either what I'm feeling or thinking about. And so really shifting movement into a category that's just as important as what we eat. So that's kind of a very practical thing of, it's not exercise, but I just need to move my body, because we spend so much time sitting and being sedentary, that, like, if you're feeling down, or even if you're feeling tired, it may be that you actually need to get up and walk around and move your body rather than taking a nap. So that's what I would say, practical thing.
That's good. Brian?
Yeah. Specific practices. I'm personally, I'm a journaler. I love, I had a friend tell me, or maybe it was a teacher, years and years ago, that if it's bouncing around in your head, it owns you. If you can write it down on paper, you own it. I want to say I'm a voracious journaler. I'm a voracious proponent of journaling. I don't always journal as much as I should, or as much as I would like to. But that's been a big practice for me. I know it's not for everybody. I think things like the Ignatian Examine daily or weekly is a big help, and I do that along with my journaling. And so yeah, I think just being able to stop and notice what's been going on around you and in you is super helpful. Anything where you can stop is really helpful. And so yeah, those would be some practices that I promote and or espouse. What was the other thing? I got so wrapped up in.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. I mean, just like steps to better health. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And go for a walk.
Now, yeah, go for a walk. Let's do this now. Martha, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you want to plug anything about your project?
Like beyond the podcast?
The book?
Yeah. I mean, oh yeah, that's kind of a different topic, but I did publish a book. I mean, this is how we met, is because I came on the podcast to talk about my previous book, which is called Why Gather, which really does wrestle with my own, kind of coming to the cusp of burnout and, with what it means to serve in, an institution that has been in decline for my entire life. And you know, how I squared that circle of like, why do I not just feel compelled to continue on in leadership in the church, but can actually embrace, continuing on in leadership in the church. And I wrote it primarily during COVID. So there's also a pandemic that factors into the book as well. I think we all got a chance to really ask whether what we were doing felt worth it when suddenly all of our regular patterns fell apart. So, Why Gather is available, you know, most of the places where you get your books online probably. And yeah, I'll wait to say more about the writing project that I'm working on right now, because it's a different beast.
Sure. Kinsie, go ahead and talk about your stuff.
Yeah. So, Restore Clergy, you can find that at restoreclergy.com. And what we offer are cohort programs. So the main one is called the Restoration Fellowship, and it's for small groups of clergy. And it's an ecumenical cohort. So it's not just the same clergy that you always see at at your denominational gatherings. And the focus of that is to really help pastors get to the root of what am I bringing into the situation that may be making it harder. You know, the thing that I was talking about in the beginning of, you know, we know there are all these systemic things. And when we are in a really stressed out situation, we can notice how everybody else is making our lives harder and how it's everybody else's fault.
Yeah.
And what this program does is really, in a gentle way, help you to turn in and look at, but what am I bringing to the table? What are the beliefs that I bring that are maybe making me feel more restricted than I actually am? And how is that impacting me emotionally and physically? And then from there, we practice, we embody it, we experiment, and really getting into that place of, well, let's try. What feels like a safe way to try this out and see what happens? Let's get some more data, but let's not get stuck up in our heads of analysis paralysis. Let's actually, can you try it out? And then if you can't, why not? Why does that make sense? Not from a place of shame, but really a place of curiosity, and growth and understanding. So that's what the Restoration Fellowship is. And you know, you're doing this work with other people so you can build really meaningful, authentic connections with folks.
Yeah. Brian, talk about Green Room Leaders.
Yeah. So, Green Room Leaders, we care a lot about the spiritual and physical and mental health of worship leaders in particular. And so we offer also a cohort called the Green Room, which is a space that we invite worship leaders into for a year to work on soul, heart, mind, and strength. So we start with the soul, which is not where a lot of, at least worship leader resources, that's not usually where they start. There's a lot of emphasis on mind and strength stuff, like how do we plan and how do we implement that plan? And we want to start with the soul and say, like, hey, remember, you are a deeply loved and accepted child of God. And remember all those people that you lead on a weekend. Those are all deeply loved children of God. So what happens if our leadership starts there? And then how does all of our planning and implementation flow out of that? And what is the fruit we get to that we get to rejoice over? So yeah, that's what we do with worship leaders. Just because we are seeing just a tremendous amount of burnout and attrition among worship leaders. I think 2 to 3 years is the average tenure of a worship pastor right now at a church. And it's not good. So yeah, we want to see longevity in ministry for worship leaders. But we also know, like, we've got to get out of that sort of chasing Sunday pattern of the weekend's the only thing that matters. As long as I can get there and get through it, that I'm going to be fine. No, you're not going to be fine. That's going to kill you over time. And so we want to create space for worship leaders to be able to find some health and some restoration and some rest in their ministry journey. So you can find out more at greenroomleaders.com. You can sign up for apply for a cohort now, and we're starting to get all those people together. So.
Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. We'll make sure we have links to Martha's book and Kinsie's Restore Clergy, and then Green Room Leaders with Brian. So, Martha, I've done the majority of this leading. And here you want to close out this episode with for our listeners, or Kinsie and Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super grateful, Loren, for you calling this panel together. As we kind of said at the outset, I would say that this is a topic that bubbles up maybe more than any other topic across the conversations that we have on Future Christian. And I just think that creating this kind of honest, collaborative space to talk about something so important. I mean, I'm quite astonished by what you just shared, Brian, about like 2 to 3 year longevity. Like that's like crazy. But like it again, it just like points to the necessity of being able to have these conversations and really do some collective resourcing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like, I don't want to speak for Martha here, but I feel like we need to make this another a standing thing.
Yeah.
To come back.
I think so.
Yeah.
Let's do this, Martha. We always leave folks with a word of peace. So we're praying God's peace for you, Brian, and Kinsie and Martha, and also for all the pastors and church leaders listening to this. So may God's peace be with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Resonate Media. We love to hear from our listeners with questions, comments, and ideas for future episodes. Visit our website at future-christian.com and find the Connect with Us form at the bottom of the page to get in touch with Martha or Loren. But before you go, do us a favor. Subscribe to the pod to leave a review. It really helps us get this out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.